The wind howled through the Bighorn Mountains like a living thing, ancient and merciless. January of 1884 had come to Wyoming territory with teeth bared and claws unsheathed. Snow fell in sheets so thick a man could lose himself 10 feet from his own door. But Kane Wolfhart was not most men. He stood at the edge of the cliff behind his lodge, 8 feet of muscle and bone wrapped in buckskin and fur, his black hair whipped in the gale loose from its usual leather tie. Dark eyes scanned the valley below where Pine Haven huddled against the storm, 50 chimneys struggling to push smoke through the assault of winter. Those people down there feared him. He knew it, had known it his entire life ever since his father walked away when Kane was only 3 years old. Too tall even as a toddler, too different, too much of his mother's Shoshone blood mixing with Irish in ways that made him neither one thing nor another. Half-breed. The word still cut after 29 years. Kane turned from the valley and walked back to his lodge. The structure sat tucked into the mountainside built with his own hands from pine and stone. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside would be warmth. Outside was only the howling emptiness that had been his companion since his mother died 5 winters past. She had been alpha of the Shoshone Wolf clan. Strong, proud. She had ruled these mountains with wisdom and fierce love for her people. And she had loved her half-breed son with the same fierce devotion even when the clan council whispered doubts. Kane entered the lodge and shook snow from his coat. His hands moved automatically to the workbench near the window. Wood shavings covered the surface. A half-finished carving sat waiting. A wolf pup no bigger than his palm emerging from a block of cedar. His mother had taught him this. Carving. She said his hands were made for creation, not just destruction. Said a man with hands big enough to crush a skull should learn gentleness first. He picked up the carving knife. The blade caught firelight as he worked each cut precise despite hands that dwarfed the tool. The wood whispered under his touch, curls falling like snow. The wolf pup's ears took shape, then its nose. The eyes would come last, always the eyes. They held the soul of the thing. Outside, the storm intensified. Kane worked through the night alone with the fire and the wind and the ghosts of everything he had lost. 20 miles down the mountain in a small cabin behind the Pine Haven Church, Serafina Thornwell prepared for what would likely be a suicide mission. She stood before her mirror, pinning gray-streaked brown hair into a tight bun. 43 years looked back at her. 15 of those years spent as a widow. 15 years of quiet research, careful healing, a life measured in pressed herbs and medical texts instead of passion or purpose. But tonight a child was dying. The message had come at dusk. Little Thomas Ravencrest, son of the Wolf clan's second family, burning with fever. Silver poisoning, the messenger said. The boy had touched contaminated water from the new mining operation upstream. Silver was death to shifters. Slow, agonizing death. And Serafina was the only person in 200 miles who had studied shifter physiology enough to maybe possibly save him. She pulled on her heavy wool coat, checked her medical bag. Herbs, tinctures, surgical tools. Everything she had learned in 15 years of obsessive study trying to fill the void William's death had left. Her late husband smiled at her from the daguerreotype on the mantel. Young, handsome, dead of consumption at 29, taking with him any hope Serafina had of children, of family, of a life that meant more than research and regret. She touched the frame once, then turned away. The storm outside was biblical. Snow already 3 feet deep and climbing. The temperature had dropped to something that made breathing painful. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Patience, stamped nervously in the small stable. Serafina saddled her, speaking softly. I know, girl, I know. But a child is dying, and I am all he has. She mounted. The wind hit her like a fist. Pine Haven disappeared behind curtains of white within minutes. Serafina knew these trails, had ridden them dozens of times to reach the Wolf Clan territory, but never in weather like this. Never with visibility measured in inches instead of miles. Patience fought the drift's powerful legs churning through snow that reached her chest. Serafina bent low over the mare's neck, trying to shield her face from ice that cut like broken glass. They made it 5 miles before disaster struck. The trail narrowed along a ridge. To the left, sheer rock face. To the right, a drop into darkness that went down 50 feet or more. Serafina had navigated this section 100 times in daylight, but tonight she could not see the edge. Patience's hoof found empty air. The mare screamed a sound of pure animal terror and lurched sideways. Serafina felt herself falling, the world tilting, the saddle suddenly gone from beneath her. She hit the slope hard. Pain exploded through her left ankle as it twisted at an angle no joint should bend. Then she was rolling, tumbling through snow and scrub pine medical bag flying from her grip. She came to rest against a boulder 20 feet down the slope. Above, Patience's cries faded as the terrified mare bolted back toward town. Serafina tried to stand. Her ankle would not bear weight. When she looked down, even in the darkness and snow, she could see the unnatural angle. Broken, or close enough to make no difference. The temperature was 15 below zero. She was 5 miles from town, 3 miles from the Wolf Clan village with a broken ankle and no horse. She would be dead by morning. The thought came with strange calm. She had lived 43 years, most of them alone. Perhaps this was simply how it ended. Frozen in the wilderness, trying to save a child she would never reach. Serafina closed her eyes against the wind, and then she heard it. A sound that made every primitive instinct in her body scream danger. The howl of a wolf, not the yipping cry of the small wolves that hunted deer. This was something deeper, larger. The howl rose and fell closer than it should be, carrying over the storm with impossible clarity. The sound stopped, silence broken only by wind. Then she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming down the slope toward her. Serafina opened her eyes. The wolf that emerged from the snow was the size of a small horse. Its coat was black as midnight, eyes gleaming gold in the darkness. Each paw was broad as a dinner plate. When it opened its mouth, teeth like daggers caught what little light filtered through the storm. This was no ordinary wolf. This was a shifter. The wolf approached slowly, head low, eyes fixed on her. Serafina knew she should be afraid, knew that wolves, even shifter wolves, were dangerous to the injured and helpless. But something in those gold eyes made her breathe. "Hello," she whispered. The wolf stopped 3 feet away, its massive head tilted, studying her with an intelligence that was utterly human. Then it began to change. The transformation took seconds, bone cracking, reforming, fur retracting. The wolf's body stretched, grew, became something else. A man knelt where the wolf had been, 8 feet tall, even crouched. Shoulders like the crossbeam of a barn, arms corded with muscle earned from a lifetime in the mountains. Long black hair hung past those shoulders, tangled with snow. A face that was hard angles and weathered bronze skin with eyes that remained gold even in human form. He was naked but seemed not to notice the cold. "You are hurt." His voice was deep as thunder but soft, careful as though he feared his words might carry too much weight. "My ankle." Serafina's teeth chattered. "Broken, I think. My horse threw me." The man looked up the slope, then back at her. "You were riding to the clan village, for Thomas Ravencrest." "How did you know?" "I am Cain Wolfheart, alpha of the Shoshone Wolf Clan. When outsiders ride toward my territory in a blizzard, I notice." Serafina had heard the name, whispered in town, the half-breed giant who ruled the wolves from his mountain lodge. Most folks said he was dangerous, a monster wearing a man's skin. But the man kneeling before her looked only concerned. "I need to reach Thomas," she said. "Silver poisoning. He will die without treatment." "He will live. My healer found the antidote 2 hours ago. The boy is sleeping peacefully." Relief flooded through her. Then reality set in. "Then I rode out here for nothing. And now I am going to freeze to death for nothing." "No." Cain reached for her hands, enormous but surprisingly gentle. "I am going to take you to my lodge, get you warm, set your ankle, and when the storm passes, I will take you home." "I cannot ask you to do that." "You did not ask. I offered." He scooped her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. Serafina found herself pressed against a chest that radiated heat like a forge. Cain's body temperature had to be 20 degrees hotter than a normal human's. The warmth was shocking after the brutal cold. "Hold on," he said. Then he was moving, carrying her up the slope with sure-footed grace that should have been impossible for something his size. The storm that had nearly killed her seemed to part before him. Within minutes they crested the ridge, and he was striding through drifts that would have buried Serafina to the waist. She should have been afraid. She was in the arms of a shifter, a predator being carried deeper into the wilderness. No one knew where she was. No one would find her if he decided to simply let the storm hide what happened next. But Kane's heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, his breathing even despite carrying her weight and fighting the snow. And his hands, those massive hands that could crush stone, held her like she was made of spun glass. How far, she managed. 2 miles. Rest if you can. I will not drop you. Serafina closed her eyes and did something she had not done in 15 years. She trusted. The lodge appeared through the snow like a miracle. Stone and timber built into the mountainside, smoke curling from a chimney that promised warmth and life. Kane kicked the door open and carried Serafina inside. Heat washed over her, so intense after the cold that it felt like being stabbed. She gasped. Kane set her gently on a low couch near the fire, then moved to close the door against the wind. For the first time, Serafina saw him clearly in firelight. He was magnificent. 8 feet of lean muscle and bronze skin, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for his size. His face was all hard planes and sharp angles weathered by wind and sun. Scars marked his arms and chest, old wounds long healed. His black hair hung past his shoulders in thick waves, and he was still completely naked. Kane seemed to realize this at the same moment. Color rose in his cheeks, the first hint of vulnerability she had seen. Apologies, I will dress. He disappeared into a back room and returned moments later, wearing buckskin pants and a simple wool shirt that strained across his shoulders. The clothes made him look almost civilized. Almost. Your ankle, he said, kneeling beside the couch. May I? Serafina nodded. She tried not to wince as he removed her boot with careful precision. Her ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, mottled purple and black. Kane's jaw tightened. Not broken, badly sprained. I have herbs that will help with the swelling and pain. You know medicine. My mother taught me. She said a leader must be able to heal as well as fight. He stood and moved to shelves lined with clay pots and glass jars. His hands so large they made the containers look like toys, selected herbs with practiced ease. He ground them in a mortar, added hot water from the kettle, created a paste that smelled of pine and something sharper. When he returned to her side, those hands were gentle as they spread the mixture over her injured ankle. The pain began to fade, almost immediately replaced by a cool tingling. You are good at this, Serafina said. I have practice. Clan members injure themselves often. Hunting accidents, training fights. My mother said if I wanted to lead, I needed to know how to put people back together. He wrapped her ankle in clean strips of cloth, his movements sure and competent. Watching him work, Serafina saw past the size and the scars to something else. Loneliness. It radiated from him like cold from stone. Why do you live up here alone? The question came out before she could stop it. Kane's hand stilled. Because alone is safer. For everyone. That is not an answer. His gold eyes met hers. In them, she saw decades of pain compressed into a single look. I am half-breed, he said quietly. My father was Irish. My mother was Shoshone Wolf Clan Alpha. By the time I turned 3, I was already tall as a 6-year-old with features too mixed to belong to either world. He called me an abomination and left. I grew up watching other children with their fathers learning to hunt and fight and be men together. I learned those things alone. Serafina's throat tightened. I am sorry. Do not be. It taught me self-reliance. And my mother loved me enough for 2 parents. He finished wrapping her ankle. She died 5 years ago. Pneumonia. On her deathbed, she made me promise to find someone who could see past the mountain of muscle to the man underneath. To build a family. Give my children the father I never had. That is a beautiful promise. It is an impossible promise. Most women in Pine Haven are married or too young or frankly terrified of me. The few who showed interest wanted the novelty of bedding a giant, not building a life with a man. He stood moved to the fire, stared into the flames. His massive frame was backlit, half in shadow, and Serafina saw not a monster, but a man who had spent his entire life being judged for things beyond his control. I know something of loneliness, she heard herself say. Kane turned. My husband died 15 years ago. Consumption. We had been married only 2 years, not long enough for children, not long enough to build the life we promised each other. She looked down at her hands. I threw myself into study afterward. Medicine herbs shift her physiology. Anything to fill the emptiness. I told myself it was enough. Told myself I did not need more. Was it enough? No. The word hung between them, honest and raw. Kane crossed back to her, moving with that predator grace. He knelt again, this time not as healer, but as something else. His eyes searched hers. "What did you need?" he asked softly. "To matter, to be seen, to wake up and feel something besides the weight of another empty day." His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, those fingers that could snap stone touched her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. "I see you, Serafina Thornwell." Her breath caught. No one had touched her with tenderness in 15 years. No one had looked at her as anything but the competent widow doctor who kept to herself. No one had seen the woman buried under layers of propriety and professional distance. But Kane saw her, and God help her, she saw him too. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as sunrise. Kane's lips were warm, tentative, asking permission with every movement. Serafina answered by threading her fingers through his hair, pulling him closer, letting 15 years of loneliness transform into 15 years of hunger. Kane pulled back, breathing hard. "We should not." "Why, boho?" "Because you are injured, because you are under my protection, because I am—" "You are a man," Serafina interrupted, "and I am a woman, and we are both so tired of being alone." Something broke in Kane's eyes. The careful control he had maintained shattered. He stood lifting her again, carrying her to the bed in the corner of the lodge. He laid her down with reverence as though she were something precious and breakable. "Your ankle," he said, "will be fine if you are careful." "I am always careful." He was. His hands, so capable of violence, touched her with infinite gentleness. He removed her clothes slowly, making sure each movement did not jar her injury. When she lay bare before him, he stopped, just looking. "You are beautiful." Serafina laughed bitter. "I am 43, gray hair, soft body, old. You are perfect." And the way he said it, the absolute conviction in his voice, made her believe it. They came together like two storms colliding. Kane's size made certain positions impossible, but he was patient, creative, devoted to her pleasure before his own. When he finally entered her, Serafina felt something she thought long dead come roaring back to life. Connection. Not just physical, though that was overwhelming enough, but deeper, soul level, as though two broken pieces had finally found their matching edges. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, warmth and gasping breath and hands finding skin. Kane moved with controlled power, conscious always of his strength, making sure every moment brought her pleasure instead of pain. When release came, it came for both of them together. Serafina cried out, clinging to shoulders broad as the horizon. Kane buried his face in her hair, saying her name like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled in furs and quilts, firelight painting their skin in shades of gold and shadow. "I did not plan that," Kane said quietly. "Neither did I. We barely know each other. I know you are gentle, lonely, that you carve wood and heal injuries and carry women out of blizzards instead of leaving them to die." His arm tightened around her. "I know you are brave, brilliant, that you rode into a killing storm to save a child who was not yours and asked nothing in return." Serafina turned her head to look at him. "What happens when the storm passes?" "I take you home. You return to your life. I return to mine." It was the sensible answer, the safe answer. It felt like death. But Serafina only nodded and let Kane pull her closer. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, two lonely people held each other and pretended morning would never come. 6 weeks later, Serafina stood in the small cabin behind the church and stared at the wash basin. She had been sick every morning for a week. At first, she told herself it was a stomach ailment, some bad meat perhaps, a touch of influenza. But this morning, when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the second time, she could no longer deny the truth. Eloan, the midwife, confirmed it within the hour. "You are with child," the old woman said, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "About 6 weeks along, I would estimate. Congratulations, dear." Serafina sat down hard on her bed. "That is impossible. I am 43 years old." Shifter seed is powerful. It can make impossible things possible. Eloan studied her shrewdly. "This is Kane Wolfhart's child, yes, from the night of the blizzard. There was no point in lying. In a town the size of Pine Haven, secrets lasted about as long as snow in July. Yes. Does he know?" "Not yet." Lowen's expression softened. "You need to tell him, Serafina. A man has a right to know he is going to be a father." After the midwife left, Serafina sat alone in the gathering dusk. Her hands rested on her stomach, which showed no sign yet of the life growing inside. A baby, at 43, with a man she had spent one night with 6 weeks ago. Terror and wonder warred in her chest. She had given up hope of children 15 years ago when William died, had convinced herself that her life's work would be healing others, not raising her own. But now a second chance, unexpected, impossible, terrifying, and she had no idea what Kane would say. The ride up to Kane's lodge took 3 hours. Serafina's ankle had healed well enough to ride, though it ached in cold weather. Spring was coming to the Bighorn Mountains, but winter still had claws. She found Kane behind the lodge chopping wood. His shirt was off despite the chill muscles moving under bronze skin as the axe rose and fell with metronomic precision. Each swing split logs that would have required 2 men to lift. He sensed her presence and turned. Surprise, then pleasure, then careful neutrality crossed his face. Serafina. Kane. He set down the axe and reached for his shirt, pulled it on. The careful formality made her heart hurt. Is something wrong? Are you injured? No, I am fine. I need to tell you something. His expression shifted to concern. He gestured toward the lodge. Come inside. I will make tea. The interior looked exactly as she remembered. The fire, the workbench covered in wood shavings. The bed where they had, she pushed the thought away. Kane busied himself with the kettle moving around the kitchen area with economical grace. When the tea was ready, he brought her a cup and sat across from her at the small table. What did you need to tell me? Serafina wrapped her hands around the warm cup. There was no easy way to say it. I am pregnant. The cup Kane was holding slipped from his fingers. It hit the table tea splashing across the wood. He did not seem to notice. What? I am carrying your child, 6 weeks along. Elowin confirmed it this morning. Kane stood so fast his chair fell backward. He walked to the window, stared out at the mountains of Stimurians, his massive frame rigid. Seconds passed, then minutes. Serafina waited hard hammering. Finally he turned, his face was carved from stone. You are certain? Yes. And the child is healthy? As far as Elowin can tell, yes. Another pause. Then Kane crossed to her in 3 strides, knelt, took her hands in his. Those gold eyes burned into hers. Marry me. Serafina blinked. What? Marry me, be my wife, let me be a father to this child. Kane, you do not have to. Yes, I do. His grip tightened. I know what it is to grow up without a father, to watch other children with theirs and wonder what you did to deserve abandonment. I swore I would never let a child of mine feel that. Never. But we barely know each other. One night does not make us suited for marriage. Then we will learn. We will figure it out as we go, but that child deserves a father, and I want to be that father. Serafina saw no love in his eyes, only duty, determination, the fierce protective instinct of a man who would not let history repeat. It was not what she had dreamed of back when she was young and foolish enough to dream, but it was honest, real, and more than she had any right to expect. All right, she whispered. I will marry you. Relief flooded Kane's face. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her still tender ankle, and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Thank you, he breathed into her hair. I will be a good husband. I swear it. I will provide for you and the child. Protect you both. Give you everything I have. Everything except love, Serafina thought. But perhaps duty and honor would be enough. They had to be. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church at the heart of Pine Haven. Serafina wore a simple cream dress. Kane wore his best buckskin jacket, hair tied back with leather cord. Elowin and Tobias Flint stood as witnesses. A handful of Wolf Clan members attended their expressions, carefully neutral. The clan council had been shocked when Kane announced his intention to marry a human, but the promise of an heir had silenced most objections. Reverend Bradford performed the ceremony, his voice echoing in the small space. Do you, Kane Wolfhart, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Serafina Thornwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Kane leaned down to kiss her. It was chaste, formal, nothing like that night 6 weeks ago. When he pulled back, his eyes held the same careful distance. They were married now, bound by law and vow and the child growing in her womb. But not by love. The reception was held in the church hall. Simple food, quiet congratulations from the assembled guests. Serafina stood beside her new husband and smiled and pretended this was what she wanted. Then the door burst open. A man strode in, tall and lean, with cold gray eyes and a smile that held no warmth. He was dressed in expensive Eastern clothes out of place in the rough frontier church. Behind him came two hired men, hard-faced and armed. Cain's entire body went rigid. "Magnus Corvain," he said, voice flat. The man smiled wider. "Alpha Wolfheart, what a pleasure to see you on this joyous occasion. I heard rumors of a wedding and simply had to offer my congratulations. You are not welcome here. Really, how ungracious, especially when I came to make you such a generous offer." Magnus pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I am prepared to pay $5,000 for your land. More than fair considering its remote location." "My land is not for sale. Everything is for sale, my primitive friend. It is simply a matter of price." Magnus's smile turned sharp. "Though I suppose a half-breed might not understand the value of progress. The railroad is coming to Wyoming, Cain. Civilization is coming, and your kind will be left behind, whether you cooperate or not." The threat hung in the air, clear as broken glass. Cain took a step forward. The two hired guns reached for their weapons. Serafina moved between them, one hand on Cain's arm. "This is our wedding day," she said, voice hard as steel. "If you have business with my husband, you can discuss it at a more appropriate time. For now, I suggest you leave." Magnus looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. His gaze dropped to her stomach, lingered there just long enough to make his suspicion clear. "Of course. My apologies for the intrusion." He tipped his hat, mockery in every line of his body. "I wish you both every happiness. Though I suspect happiness will be difficult to find when your land is seized for failure to pay the taxes you owe." "I owe no taxes." "Not yet, but accidents happen. Property lines shift. Mistakes are made in the territorial records." Magnus headed for the door, his men following. He paused on the threshold. "Enjoy your wedding night, Alpha. It may be the last peaceful evening you have for some time." Then he was gone. The silence in his wake was deafening. Cain's hands had curled into fists, knuckles white. Serafina could feel tremors running through him, rage and fear fighting for dominance. "What was that about?" she asked quietly. "Trouble." Cain turned to look at her. "Magnus Corvain owns the railroad company expanding into Wyoming. He has been trying to buy my land for 2 years." "Why does he want it so badly?" "I will show you." That night, after the other guests had left, Cain took Serafina up to his lodge on horseback. It was her first time seeing it since that night 6 weeks ago. The memories threatened to overwhelm her. But Cain did not lead her inside. Instead, he walked to the cliff edge behind the structure to a spot where the rock face had collapsed into a natural cave mouth. "Come," he said. He lit a lantern and led her into darkness. The cave went back 50 feet, then opened into a larger chamber. Cain held the lantern high, and Serafina gasped. The walls glittered, not with gold or silver, but with something darker. Black stone shot through with veins of crystalline mineral that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow prisms. "Coal," Cain said. "Millions of tons of it, the geologists estimate. High-quality anthracite. Burns hotter and cleaner than any other type. Worth a fortune to whoever controls it. And Magnus knows about this. He suspects. He has had surveyors sneaking onto clan land for months. I keep chasing them off, but they keep coming back." Cain set the lantern down. "If he can force me off this land, he will mine every ounce of coal and make millions. The railroad will run right through here, connecting the coal fields to the eastern markets." Serafina looked at the glittering walls and saw not beauty, but danger. This was what Magnus wanted. This was why he had crashed their wedding with threats and smiles. "What are you going to do?" Cain's expression was grim. "Protect what is mine. My land, my clan, my family." His hand came to rest on her stomach, still flat but harboring life. "Our family," Serafina corrected softly. Something shifted in his eyes. Not quite love, but perhaps the beginning of it. They stood in the cave, surrounded by the fortune that would make them a target, and held each other in the lamplight. Outside, spring was coming to the Bighorn Mountains. But winter was not finished with them yet. 3 weeks passed. Serafina moved into the lodge bringing her medical supplies and books. She and Kane circled each other like wary strangers, polite and careful. They slept in the same bed but on opposite sides, a careful distance maintained. Kane provided for her with quiet efficiency, hunted fresh meat, kept the fire burning, carved a cradle from cedar, working on it in the evenings while she read medical texts. They were building something. Not love, not yet, but partnership, respect. Then came the morning, everything shattered. Serafina woke to voices outside, angry voices. She sat up, found Kane already pulling on his clothes, face hard. "Stay inside," he said, but she followed him to the window. Deputy Garrett stood outside with 4 federal marshals. Behind them, a wagon loaded with what looked like timber. "Kane Wolfhart," Garrett called, "we have a warrant to search these premises." "On what grounds?" "Suspicion of theft of federal timber. We have reports that you have been cutting on protected land." Kane's jaw clenched. "I have proper permits for all my timber." "This is a lie." "Then you will not mind if we search your property to confirm." There was no legal way to refuse. Kane stepped aside and the marshals spread out across his land. It took them less than 10 minutes to find what they were looking for. 20 massive logs, each stamped with federal property marks, stacked in the storage shed behind the lodge. Serafina watched Kane's face drain of color. "Those were not there yesterday," he said. "Someone planted them." Garrett pulled out iron shackles. "Kane Wolfhart, you are under arrest for theft of federal property. Value estimated at $5,000. That is a federal crime punishable by 5 to 10 years in prison. This is Magnus's doing. He set this up. I am sure you can explain that to the judge." Garrett snapped the shackles on Kane's wrists. They were made of steel, reinforced with silver. The metal sizzled against Kane's skin, and he flinched, but did not cry out. Serafina ran forward. "You cannot do this. He is innocent." "Step back, ma'am. This is federal business." "I am his wife. That makes it my business, too." Garrett looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. His gaze dropped to her stomach, where at 3 months the pregnancy was starting to show beneath her dress. "Is that so? Well, ain't that interesting?" He smiled, cold and knowing. "Congratulations, Mrs. Wolfhart. I do hope you can manage the homestead while your husband is away, though I suspect that might be difficult, a woman in your condition all alone up here in the mountains." The threat was clear. Kane surged forward, rage overriding pain. "If you touch her, I would not dream of it." Garrett stepped back, hand on his pistol. "But accidents happen, especially to women living alone in dangerous territory." They dragged Kane toward the wagon. He fought every step, silver shackles burning his wrist, but 4 men with clubs and determination eventually forced him into the back. Serafina stood on the porch of the lodge, one hand on her stomach, watching them take away the husband she was only beginning to know. Kane looked back at her, gold eyes blazing. "Protect yourself and our child. That is all that matters." "I will get you out," she called. "I swear it." "No, do not risk yourself. Promise me." But Serafina made no promises. As the wagon disappeared down the mountain trail, she turned and walked back into the empty lodge, looked at the half-finished cradle, the medical text, the carved wooden animals scattered across the workbench, evidence of a life they had barely started building. Magnus Corvain wanted to destroy Kane, wanted to steal his land, his legacy, everything he had. He had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated what a 43-year-old widow carrying a child would do to protect her family. Serafina walked to the shelves and pulled down her most comprehensive medical text on shifter anatomy and physiology. Opened it to a page she had studied countless times. Then she sat down at Kane's workbench, picked up a blank piece of paper, and began to plan. Outside, spring continued its slow march across the mountains. Inside, a scholar prepared for war. The Pine Haven jail was not built for men like Kane Wolfhart. The cell measured 8 feet by 6. Kane could not stand fully upright without his head brushing the ceiling, could not stretch his arms without touching both walls. The iron bars were standard thickness, meant to hold drunks and petty thieves, not an alpha shifter with the strength to bend steel. But the shackles were another matter. They had moved him from the transport wagon to the barrel, still wearing the silver reinforced restraints. The metal burned constantly, a low, simmering agony that never stopped. Silver poisoning crept through his system, slowly making him weaker by the hour. By the 3rd day, Kane could barely stand. Deputy Garrett came by twice daily, always with that cold smile, always with the same message. Magnus sends his regards. Says to tell you the trial is set for 4 weeks from now. Judge Morgan presiding. Should be a real quick proceeding, what with all that evidence stacked up against you. 6 weeks. Serafina would be nearly 5 months pregnant by then, showing clearly, vulnerable. Cain forced himself to eat the slop they brought him, forced himself to do what exercises he could in the cramped space. The silver made healing impossible, made shifting impossible, but he could not afford to grow weaker, because he had no intention of staying in this cell for 6 weeks. On the fourth night, a wolf's howl echoed through Pine Haven. Then another, then a third. The clan was calling to their alpha. Cain closed his eyes and howled back. The sound came from deep in his chest, primal and commanding. It rattled the bars of his cell, made Garrett jump 3 cells down. "Shut up, you animal!" But Cain kept howling, and outside the clan answered. The conversation took place in tones and rhythms humans could not decipher. Cain called for Tobias Flint, his second, told him in wolf song what needed to happen. When? How? By morning the plan was set. Cain just had to survive long enough to execute it. 20 miles away in the lodge that now felt cavernous without Cain's presence, Serafina stood before the fireplace and burned the last of her illusions about propriety. She was 3 months pregnant alone, and her husband faced 10 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Propriety could go to hell. She had spent the past 4 days conducting research with the methodical precision of a scholar preparing a dissertation. Her notebook was filled with names, dates, patterns. The evidence pointed in one direction. Magnus Corvain was not just targeting Cain, he was targeting everyone who stood between him and complete control of the Bighorn coalfields. Serafina had ridden to 6 homesteads in 4 days, ignoring her protesting ankle and the nausea that came in waves. At each stop, she interviewed families who had lost their land in the past 2 years. The Blackwood family, timber theft charges, 20 federal logs found on their property, convicted, land seized. The Flint brothers, cattle rustling, 30 head of branded federal stock found in their barn, convicted, land seized. The Ravencrest pack, poaching charges, 50 elk carcasses discovered in their smokehouse, convicted, land seized. The pattern was damning. Every family had been accused of crimes involving federal property. Every family had been convicted based on evidence that appeared suddenly planted by parties unknown. Every family had lost land that, according to territorial survey records, sat directly on top of coal deposits. And every arrest had been made by Deputy Garrett. Serafina closed her notebook and stared at the pages of notes. This was conspiracy, systematic, organized, backed by money and power that reached all the way to the territorial capital. She needed proof, not circumstantial evidence, not patterns and theories, actual documents linking Magnus to the planted evidence, which meant she needed to get inside of Magnus's office. The thought terrified her, but the alternative was worse. She placed one hand on her stomach, where the baby was beginning to make its presence known with small flutters. Her child deserved a father, deserved to grow up free, not branded as the offspring of a convicted criminal. Serafina would burn the world down before she let that happen. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Elowen standing on the porch, a basket over her arm. "How are you feeling?" the midwife asked, stepping inside without invitation. "Fine." "Liar, you have been riding all over the territory for 4 days. Your ankle is swelling again, and you look like you have not slept since Cain was arrested." Serafina said nothing. Elowen set her basket on the table. "I brought herbs for the nausea and bread since I doubt you have been eating properly." "Thank you." The midwife studied her with eyes that saw too much. "What are you planning, child?" "I am going to prove my husband's innocence." Serafina met her gaze steadily. "By getting evidence that will destroy Magnus Corvain." "That is dangerous?" "Yes." "You could be killed or arrested yourself." "Yes." Elowen was silent for a long moment. Then she pulled something from her basket, a small pistol worn but well-maintained. "If you are going to do something foolish, at least do it armed." Serafina took the weapon. It was heavier than she expected. "Do you know how to use it?" Elowen asked. "No." "Then I will teach you." They spent the next hour in the clearing behind the lodge. Elowen showed her how to load aim fire. The recoil nearly knocked Serafina on her back the first time. By the 10th shot, she could hit the target 2 out of 3 tries. Good enough to scare someone, Elowen said. Not good enough to win a gunfight. Do not get into a gunfight. Noted. That evening, as Elowen prepared to leave, she paused at the door. There is one more thing you should know. A man came to see me yesterday, Jacob Winters, the trapper. Serafina knew the name. Jacob had a reputation as honest, hardworking. 6 children to feed after his brother died. What did he want? To confess. Elowen's expression was troubled. He said Magnus paid him $100 to move federal timber onto Kane's property. Said he has not slept right since. Said the guilt was eating him alive. Serafina's heart began to pound. Where is he now? Home, terrified. Magnus told him if he spoke a word to anyone, his family would pay the price. I need to talk to him. I thought you might. I will arrange a meeting, tomorrow night, somewhere private. After Elowen left, Serafina stood alone in the gathering dark. She had an eyewitness willing to testify. She had patterns and evidence of systematic fraud. What she needed now was the smoking gun, documents in Magnus's own hand proving he orchestrated everything, which meant the heist was not just possible. It was necessary. The meeting with Jacob Winters took place in the abandoned Miller barn 3 miles outside Pine Haven. Serafina arrived after dark, moving carefully on her still tender ankle. Her hand rested on the pistol tucked into her coat. Jacob was already there, pacing like a caged animal. He was 35 but looked 50, weathered by hard work and harder choices. When he saw Serafina, shame flooded his face. Mrs. Wolfhart, I am so sorry. I am so goddamn sorry. Tell me what happened. The story came out in broken sentences. Magnus had approached Jacob 2 weeks before Kane's arrest, offered $100 more money than Jacob made in 2 months to move timber from Magnus's mill to Kane's property. Just move it. Nothing illegal about moving timber, right? Except the logs had federal property stamps. Except Jacob knew they were being planted to frame an innocent man. Except he took the money anyway because his children were hungry and winter had been brutal. I knew it was wrong, Jacob said, voice cracking. But $100, that was shoes for the kids, food for the rest of the season, medicine for my sister-in-law who has been sick since my brother died. I understand, Serafina said quietly. Did you? Because I helped destroy a good man's life for money, I am no better than Magnus. Yes, you are. Because you came forward. Because the guilt is eating you alive. Magnus sleeps soundly at night. Jacob looked at her, eyes red. What do you need from me? Testimony, in court, everything you just told me. Magnus will kill me, or my family. Federal Marshal Cooper can offer protection, witness protection. You and your family relocated new identities if necessary. And if I refuse, Serafina met his gaze without flinching, then my husband goes to prison for 10 years. My child grows up without a father. And Magnus continues destroying families until someone finally stops him. The silence stretched. Then Jacob nodded slowly. All right, I will testify. God help me, I will testify. Serafina felt the first flicker of hope since Kane's arrest. But hope was not enough. She needed ammunition. The plan came together over the next week. Serafina recruited carefully. Elowen, who had decades of experience keeping secrets. Rowena Blackwood, the blacksmith's wife, strong and fearless. Tobias Flint, who brought word from Kane. The Alpha was planning something from inside his cell. What exactly Tobias would not say, but there would be a distraction. Friday evening. That was all Serafina needed to know. Friday was when Magnus held his weekly supervisors meeting, 3 hours every week like clockwork. His office would be empty except for his secretary who always left early on Fridays. It was their best chance, their only chance. Serafina spent the week studying the layout of Magnus's building in town. 3 stories, red brick with Magnus's office on the 2nd floor. 2 entrances, 1 front, 1 rear. Security was minimal. Magnus relied on reputation and fear, not guards. That would be his undoing. Thursday night, a letter arrived at the lodge. No signature. But Serafina recognized the handwriting from legal documents she had seen. It was from the Hartford family lawyers in Boston. Her hands shook as she opened it. Dear Mrs. Wolfhart, it has come to our attention that you are expecting a child. As the late William Hartford's family retains legitimate interest in any potential heirs while connected to the Hartford bloodline, we hereby assert our claim to custody of said child upon birth. Furthermore, we remind you that your marriage to a convicted criminal pending trial outcome may constitute grounds for nullification of inheritance rights previously granted through your marriage to William Hartford. The estate valued at $50,000 may be subject to reclamation. You have 7 days to respond to this demand. Sincerely, a Hartford family legal counsel, Serafina read the letter 3 times each, reading making her angrier. Magnus. This had his fingerprints all over it. He had contacted the Hartford lawyers, fed them information, weaponized her own late husband's family against her. 2 fronts. He was attacking on 2 fronts while Kane sat helpless in jail. She crumpled the letter and threw it into the fire, watched it burn to ash. Then she loaded Elowin's pistol and prepared for war. Friday evening arrived with clear skies and cold wind. Serafina stood across the street from Magnus's office, wearing a dark coat and men's trousers borrowed from Kane's wardrobe. At 3.5 months pregnant, her stomach was beginning to show, but the loose coat hid most of it. Beside her, Rowena Blackwood checked the wagon for the 3rd time. Horses are fresh. Route is planned. We get you out, we ride hard for the courthouse. Marshal Cooper will be waiting. And if something goes wrong, then I create a bigger distraction and you run. Elowen appeared from the shadows. The secretary just left. Building is clear except for the meeting on the 3rd floor. Serafina took a breath. Then it is time. She crossed the street, moving with purpose. Confidence was everything. If she looked like she belonged, most people would not question her presence. The rear entrance was unlocked as expected. Magnus's arrogance again. Who would dare break into his office? Serafina climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. Her ankle protested every step. The pistol was a reassuring weight in her coat pocket. Magnus's office door was closed but not locked. She slipped inside, shut the door behind her, and finally let herself breathe. The office was exactly what she expected. Expensive furniture, maps covering one wall, filing cabinets, a massive desk covered in papers. She went to the desk first, sorted through correspondence with practiced efficiency, bills of sale, mining reports, nothing incriminating. The drawers yielded more. In the 3rd drawer, she found a leather-bound ledger. Her hands trembled as she opened it, page after page of transactions. Names and amounts in neat columns. Deputy Garrett, $500. Judge William Cartwright, $1,000. Sheriff Thomas Morrison, $250 monthly. Jacob Winters, $100. It was a record of every bribe Magnus had paid. Years of corruption meticulously documented. Serafina felt triumph surge through her. This was it, the evidence they needed. But she kept searching. The filing cabinet was locked. She used a letter opener from the desk, worked the blade into the mechanism the way she had practiced on the cabin door. Something clicked. The drawer opened. Inside were folders. She pulled them out one by one, scanning contents. Land deeds, geological surveys, correspondence. Then she found it. A letter from Magnus to Deputy Garrett dated 3 weeks before Kane's arrest. Arranged for the planting of 20 federal timber logs on the Wolfhart property. Timing must coincide with his absence from the homestead. Ensure witnesses can verify discovery. Payment of $500 upon completion and arrest. It was signed in Magnus's own hand with his company seal at the bottom. Serafina carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her coat. Took the ledger as well. This was more than she had hoped for. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart stopped. The supervisor's meeting was not supposed to end for another hour. The footsteps grew louder, closer, then stopped outside the door. The handle turned. Serafina moved on instinct, pressing herself against the wall behind the door as it swung open. Magnus Corvain entered, still talking to someone in the hallway. Just let me get those contracts and I will meet you downstairs. He moved toward his desk. Serafina held her breath, one hand on the pistol in her pocket. Magnus reached for the top drawer, noticed it was slightly open, frowned. Then he turned and saw her. For one frozen second, they stared at each other. Magnus's face went through surprise recognition and cold fury in rapid succession. Well, Mrs. Wolfhart, What an unexpected visit. Serafina pulled the pistol. Her hand shook, but the barrel pointed at Magnus's chest. Step away from the desk. Magnus smiled, actually smiled. You are not going to shoot me. Try me. You are a doctor, a scholar. You have spent your life saving people, not killing them. He took a step toward her. Besides, you are pregnant. 3.5 months by my estimation. Even if you pulled that trigger, even if you somehow managed to hit me, you would be arrested. Your child would be born in prison. Better than letting you destroy everything Cain has built. Another step. Is it because from where I stand, you are a desperate woman making desperate choices? Trespassing, theft, threatening a territorial councilman with a deadly weapon. Those are serious crimes, Serafina. He was backing her toward the door. She had to get out. Now. Serafina feinted left, then bolted right towards the door. She was fast, but Magnus was faster. His hand caught her arm, yanked her back. The ledger and letter fell from her coat, scattered across the floor. Magnus saw them. His expression darkened. Clever girl. I underestimated you. His grip tightened. But cleverness will not save you now. Serafina brought the pistol up, pressed it against his ribs. Let me go, or I swear to God, I will pull this trigger. No, you will not. He was right. She could not. Not in cold blood, not even to save herself. Magnus saw it in her eyes and smiled. Then the window exploded inward in a shower of glass. A massive black wolf crashed through 800 pounds of muscle and fury. It hit Magnus like a battering ram, sending him flying across the room. The wolf landed between Magnus and Serafina, hackles raised, teeth bared. Cain. But how he was in jail. Silver shackles. Guards. The wolf's gold eyes met hers for one blazing second. Then he jerked his head toward the door. Run. Serafina grabbed the ledger and letter from the floor and ran. Behind her, Magnus was screaming for his guards. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. She burst into the hallway. Men were coming from both directions. She turned, saw a window at the far end, and made a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. She ran for the window and jumped. The drop was only one story, but she landed wrong. Pain exploded through her ankle, the same one she had injured in the blizzard. She felt something tear, but she was outside, free. Rowena brought the wagon racing around the corner. Serafina threw herself onto the moving vehicle, clutching the documents to her chest. Go. Go. The wagon lurched forward. Behind them, Magnus's men poured out of the building. Shots rang out. A bullet splintered the wagon's side panel inches from Serafina's head. Then more wolves appeared, 6 of them massive and deadly, forming a barrier between the wagon and their pursuers. The clan. They had come when their alpha called. Through the chaos, Serafina saw Cain burst out of the building in human form, now naked and bleeding from a dozen cuts. Deputy Garrett and 4 men were chasing him, but Cain was faster. He shifted mid-stride, becoming wolf again, and disappeared into the maze of Pine Haven's back alleys. The wagon raced through town, Rowena driving like a demon. They skidded around corners, jumped a drainage ditch, scattered chickens, and cursing townsfolk. Finally, they saw it. The courthouse. Federal Marshal Cooper standing on the steps, hand on his pistol. Rowena halted the wagon to a stop. Serafina half fell off, clutching the documents. Marshal, I have evidence. Magnus Corvain, bribery, conspiracy, everything. Then her vision swam. The adrenaline that had kept her going drained away all at once. She looked down and saw blood spreading across her skirt. Not from the jump, from somewhere inside. The baby, she whispered. Then the world tilted and went dark. Serafina woke to white ceiling and the smell of carbolic acid. Hospital. She tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her abdomen, sharp and terrifying. Easy. Elowen's face swam into view. Do not move yet. The baby? Still alive, but it was close, Serafina. Too close. Elowen's expression was grim. You are nearly 4 months along now. The trauma from the fall, the stress your body tried to miscarry. Memory flooded back. The jump, the blood. Serafina's hands flew to her stomach. You were bleeding internally. The trauma from the fall, the stress your body tried to miscarry. Elowen's expression was grim. The doctor said it is a miracle the child survived, but you need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. No riding, no stress, nothing that could trigger another episode. Where is Kane? In custody. He escaped jail to come help you. That is a federal offense. Elle Lowen squeezed her hand. But Marshal Cooper saw what Magnus's men were doing. He knows this whole thing is a setup. The evidence, the ledger, the letter. Safe, Cooper has them. He says it is enough to convict Magnus on multiple counts. Relief washed through Serafina, followed immediately by fear. What happens to Kane? That depends on the judge. Escaping custody is serious. But given the circumstances, Cooper thinks there is a chance for leniency. The door opened. Marshal Cooper entered, hat in hand. He was a weathered man of 58 with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much corruption to be shocked by anything. Mrs. Wolfhard, glad to see you awake. Where is my husband? In a cell, temporary holding until we can sort out this mess. Cooper pulled up a chair. I need to know everything, from the beginning. Serafina told him. All of it. The pattern of families losing land, Jacob Winter's confession, the planted evidence, the systematic bribes documented in Magnus's ledger. Cooper listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. I have been investigating Magnus Corvain for 6 months, following a trail of suspicious land acquisitions across 3 territories. What you found confirms every suspicion. Can you convict him? With this evidence, absolutely. Bribery of federal officials, conspiracy to defraud, false imprisonment. The list is long. He paused, but there is a complication. Serafina's stomach nodded. What kind of complication? Your husband escaped federal custody. That is a felony. Regardless of his reasons, regardless of the circumstances, he broke the law. He was trying to save me. I know, and I will testify to that. But the prosecutor will argue that Kane took the law into his own hands, that he is a danger to public safety. And given his size, his shifter nature, there are people who will be inclined to agree. So what are you saying? Cooper's expression was sympathetic. I am saying there will be 2 trials. Magnus for conspiracy and corruption, and Kane for escape from custody. The words hit Serafina like a physical blow. No, no, he was defending his wife, his unborn child. Any jury will see that. I hope you are right, but shifters do not always get fair trials, Mrs. Wolfhard. You know that. He was right, she did know it, had seen it in the way people looked at Kane, the way they whispered when he came to town. Half-breed, monster, beast. When she managed, 3 weeks, both trials back to back. We need time to prepare the cases, gather witnesses. Cooper stood. In the meantime, you need to rest, for the baby's sake. After he left, Serafina lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. 3 weeks. 3 weeks until Kane's fate was decided. 3 weeks until she knew whether her child would have a father or grow up visiting him in prison. She placed both hands on her stomach where the baby kicked weakly. A survivor like its father, fighting to live despite impossible odds. We are not done yet, Serafina whispered. We are not done fighting. They allowed Kane to visit the next morning. He came flanked by 2 guards still wearing the silver-reinforced shackles. The metal had burned raw wounds into his wrists. He looked thinner, paler, but his gold eyes blazed when he saw Serafina in the hospital bed. Leave us, he said to the guards. Regulations say leave us, or I will make you leave. Something in his voice made the guards exchange looks. They stepped outside but stayed close to the door. Kane crossed to the bed in 3 strides and knelt beside it. His shackled hands reached for her face, touched her with heartbreaking gentleness. They told me you nearly lost the baby, that you were bleeding, that you jumped out of a goddamn window while 3.5 months pregnant. I had the evidence. I had to get it to Cooper. You could have died. So could you. You broke out of jail. Do you know what the penalty for that is? I do not care. Magnus's men were going to kill you. I heard them planning it. I had to get to you. His voice broke on the last word. Serafina covered his hands with hers. How did you escape? Tobias and 3 pack members created a distraction. Set fire to the old mill. Every guard in town went running. I broke the cell lock, broke the shackles, and ran. He looked down at the new shackles. These ones are stronger. The silver is poisoning you. I know, but I will heal once they are off. He met her eyes. Serafina, I need to tell you something, in case the trial does not go our way. in case they send me to prison. Do not talk like that. Listen to me. His grip tightened. I have been alone my whole life. From the moment my father walked away, I convinced myself that being alone was safer, easier, that I did not need anyone. Kane, then you rode into that blizzard. You looked at me, this giant half-breed that terrifies children, and you saw a man. Not a monster, a man. His voice dropped to a whisper. These past months, learning to live with you, watching you carry our child, seeing your courage. Serafina Werfursten. He stopped, swallowed hard. I love you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. I know I said this marriage was about duty, about giving our child a father, but somewhere along the way, it became about you, about waking up and seeing your face, about your laugh when I carve something that pleases you, about the way you rest your hand on your stomach when you are thinking. Tears streamed down Serafina's face. I love you, Kane said again. And if they take me away, I need you to know that. I need you to tell our daughter that her father loved her mother more than his own life. Serafina pulled him close as the shackles and hospital bed allowed. You are not going to prison. I will not let that happen. You cannot control what a jury decides. Watch me. She kissed him, tasting salt and hope and fear. When they broke apart, both were crying. I love you too, Serafina whispered. I think I have loved you since that night in the blizzard. I was just too afraid to admit it. Kane rested his forehead against hers. Then we have something worth fighting for. Yes, we do. The guards knocked. Visiting time was over. Kane stood reluctantly, looked down at Serafina with those gold eyes that saw straight through to her soul. Rest, heal, take care of yourself and our child. That is all I ask. I will, but Kane, yes. I am also going to take care of you. We are Pack now, and Pack does not abandon its own. Something fierce and grateful flashed across his face. Then the guards were leading him away, and Serafina was alone again with the baby and the certainty that the hardest battle was still to come. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Serafina remained in the hospital for 3 days until the doctor was satisfied the baby was stable. Then she returned to the lodge and threw herself into building Kane's defense. She could not ride, could not do heavy work, but she could think, could plan, could marshal their allies. Tobias Flint brought the clan elders. They pledged support money, witnesses. Whatever Kane needed, Alowan rallied the townswomen. They started a petition demanding fair treatment for Kane, gathering hundreds of signatures. Rowena Blackwood organized the families Magnus had destroyed, 6 households all willing to testify about systematic harassment and planted evidence. And Jacob Winters, terrified but resolute, agreed to full testimony about being paid to move the timber. Marshal Cooper coordinated everything. He had brought in a federal prosecutor from the territorial capital, a man named Samuel Harrison, who specialized in corruption cases. But he had also been honest about the challenges. Magnus has powerful friends, Cooper said during one of his visits to the lodge. Judges, politicians, businessmen who profit from his operations. They will fight hard to protect him. Then we fight harder, Serafina said. She spent her evenings writing, documenting everything, creating timelines, cross-referencing witness statements, building an ironclad case. At night, alone in the bed she had shared with Kane, for such a short time she placed her hands on her growing stomach and whispered to their daughter, "Your father is the strongest man I know, gentle and fierce. He would move mountains for you, for us, and we will move mountains for him." The baby kicked strong and sure, a survivor, just like her parents. 3 weeks after the chase through Pine Haven on a cold morning in late April, Serafina stood before her mirror and prepared for battle. She wore a simple blue dress that accommodated her growing stomach. At nearly 5 months, pregnancy was impossible to hide. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman fighting for her family's survival. She pulled her hair into a neat bun, checked her reflection, saw determination staring back. Outside, a wagon waited. Elwyn and Rowena sat on the driver's bench. Tobias and 3 clan members rode alongside as escorts. The trials would begin today. Magnus first, then Kane. Justice, such as it was, would be served. Serafina walked out of the lodge, locked the door behind her, and climbed into the wagon. Behind her, the morning sun rose over the Bighorn Mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Ahead lay the courthouse, the jury, the verdict that would determine everything. But Serafina was not afraid. She had stared down a blizzard, survived Magnus Corvain, nearly lost her child and kept fighting. She was a scholar who had become a warrior, a widow who had learned to love again, a mother willing to burn the world down to protect her family. Let them try to stop her. The wagon rolled toward Pine Haven, toward the courthouse, toward whatever came next. And Serafina Wolfhart rode into battle with her head held high and her heart full of steel. The territorial courthouse in Pine Haven was built to hold 200 souls. On the morning of April 23, 1884, more than 500 crowded inside and spilled onto the streets. Word had spread across Wyoming territory. The trial of Magnus Corvain, the railroad baron who had built an empire on stolen land and broken lives. The man who had bought judges and sheriffs like other men, bought cattle, and alongside him Cain Wolfhart, the half-breed alpha who had broken out of federal custody to save his pregnant wife. 2 trials, 2 verdicts, 2 futures hanging in the balance. Serafina sat in the front row, hands folded over her swollen stomach. At 4.5 months, the baby made its presence known with constant movement, kicks and rolls that reminded her why she was here, what she was fighting for. Beside her sat Elowen and Rowena. Behind them, the families Magnus had destroyed. The Blackwoods, the Flints, the Ravencrests, was waiting to see justice served or denied. Across the aisle, Magnus Corvain sat flanked by his expensive lawyers from the territorial capital. He wore a tailored suit, hair perfectly combed, the picture of respectability. When his eyes met Serafina's, he smiled. Cold, confident, unafraid. He still thought he would win. Judge Thaddeus Morgan entered and the crowd rose as one. Morgan was 62 with iron gray hair and a face carved from granite. He had a reputation throughout the territory as incorruptible, hard but fair. It was why Marshal Cooper had pushed to have him preside. "Be seated," Morgan said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the packed room. "We will begin with the matter of the territory versus Magnus Corvain. Charges of bribery of federal officials, conspiracy to defraud, unlawful seizure of property, and obstruction of justice." The prosecutor, Samuel Harrison, stood. He was 45, lean as a whip, with the intensity of a man who had spent his career fighting corruption. "Your Honor, the territory will demonstrate through documentary evidence and witness testimony that the defendant engaged in a systematic campaign to defraud homesteaders of their land through fabricated criminal charges and bribery of law enforcement officials." Magnus's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Blackwell, rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the defense will show that my client is a legitimate businessman whose only crime is success. These charges are the desperate fabrications of individuals seeking to profit from false accusations." Morgan's gavel cracked. "Save your arguments for closing. Mr. Harrison, present your evidence." What followed was 3 hours of methodical destruction. Harrison began with the ledger, page after page projected onto a board for the jury to see. Each entry read aloud, each name a dagger. Deputy Garrett, $500. Payment for planting evidence on Wolfhart property. Judge William Cartwright, $1,000. Payment for favorable rulings in land seizure cases. Sheriff Thomas Morrison, $250 monthly. Ongoing payments for cooperation and frame operations. The list went on. 12 officials, thousands of dollars, years of corruption laid bare. Then came the letter, Magnus's own handwriting, his company's seal. Harrison read it slowly, letting each word sink in. Arrange for the planting of 20 federal timber logs on the Wolfhart property. Timing must coincide with his absence from the homestead. Ensure witnesses can verify discovery. Payment of $500 upon completion and arrest. The courtroom erupted, angry voices, shouting. Morgan's gavel cracked repeatedly before order was restored. "This document," Harrison said, holding it up, "is signed by Magnus Corvain, sealed with his company stamp. It is a written confession to conspiracy and fraud." Blackwell objected strenuously. "That document was obtained through illegal trespass. Mrs. Wolfhart broke into my client's private office. It should be inadmissible." Mrs. Wolfhart was acting as a civilian investigator assisting a federal marshal in an ongoing corruption investigation. Harrison countered. Federal Statute 2341 allows for citizen participation in uncovering crimes against the public good. The evidence is admissible. Morgan considered. I will allow it. Continue, Mr. Harrison. Next came the witnesses. Jacob Winters took the stand, first hand shaking but voice steady. He told his story without embellishment. The $100 payment, moving the timber, knowing it was wrong but doing it anyway because his children were hungry. Do you see the man who paid you in this courtroom? Harrison asked. Yes, sir. Deputy Garrett gave me the money, but it came from him. Jacob pointed at Magnus. He is the one who set it all up. Blackwell tried to tear Jacob apart on cross-examination, called him a liar, a criminal, a man who would say anything for immunity, but Jacob did not break. I know what I am, sir. I know what I did, but I also know the truth. And the truth is that Magnus Corvain paid me to destroy an innocent man's life. One by one, the families testified. The Blackwoods described finding timber on their property, the arrest, the trial, losing everything. The Flints told of cattle that appeared in their barn overnight, federal branded stock they had never seen before. Conviction, land seizure. The Raven Crest spoke of elk carcasses planted in their smokehouse while they were away for a funeral. Charges, prison, ruin. The pattern was undeniable, damning. Each family's land had been surveyed for coal deposits. Each arrest had been made by Deputy Garrett. Each conviction had led to Magnus acquiring the property for a fraction of its value. By noon, the prosecution rested. Blackwell tried to fight back, called character witnesses who testified to Magnus's philanthropy, his business acumen, his importance to Wyoming's economic growth. But none of it mattered against the documentary evidence, the signed letter, the ledger, the testimony of a dozen witnesses. When Harrison gave his closing argument, he spoke for 20 minutes, but the words that mattered most took less than one. Magnus Corvain is not a businessman, he is a thief. He stole land, stole lives, stole futures, and he did it with contempt for the law and the people he was destroying. The evidence is overwhelming. Thus, a verdict should be swift. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood. We find the defendant, Magnus Corvain, guilty on all counts. The courthouse exploded in cheers. People hugged, cried. 15 years of Magnus's reign of terror ending in those 5 words. Judge Morgan gavelled for order. When silence finally fell, he turned to Magnus. You have used wealth and power to corrupt the institutions meant to protect people. You have destroyed families for profit. You have perverted justice itself. Morgan's voice was cold as winter stone. I hereby sentence you to 20 years in federal prison. All assets and properties acquired through illegal means are forfeit and will be returned to their rightful owners. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $100,000 to be divided among your victims. Magnus's face went purple with rage. He surged to his feet. This is a travesty. I have friends, powerful friends. They will sit down, Morgan said quietly, or I will add contempt to your charges. Magnus sat, but his eyes promised murder. The crowd filed out jubilant. Justice had been served. The monster was caged. But Serafina could not celebrate yet, because Cain's trial started in 1 hour. The courtroom felt different for the second trial. The jubilation had faded, replaced by tension. Cain sat at the defense table still wearing the silver shackles. They had been on for 3 weeks now. The burns on his wrists had gone from raw to infected. Silver poisoning made his skin ashen, his movements slow. But when his eyes met Serafina's, they blazed with the same fierce determination. The prosecutor for this trial was a territorial attorney named Davis, young, ambitious, looking to make a name. The facts are simple, Davis said in his opening statement. Cain Wolfhart was lawfully arrested and held in federal custody on charges of timber theft. He escaped that custody by force breaking a cell lock and injuring 2 guards in the process. Escape from federal custody is a felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The defendant's reasons, however sympathetic, do not change the law. Harrison stood for the defense. The facts are indeed simple. Cain Wolfhart learned that his pregnant wife was in mortal danger. He heard Magnus Corvain's men planning to murder her. He acted to save her life. This was not escape. This was defense of family under circumstances that would have driven any man to the same choice. Davis presented his case quickly: the broken cell lock, testimony from guards about Kane's strength, the damage to federal property. Then he called Deputy Garrett. Garrett took the stand, his earlier confidence shaken by Magnus's conviction, but still present. He described Kane's arrest, the secure cell, the silver shackles. Then on the evening of April 2nd, there was a fire at the old mill. Every available man responded. When we returned, Wolfhart's cell was empty. Lock broken clean off. He had vanished. In your professional opinion, Davis asked, could this escape have been accomplished without supernatural strength? No, sir. That lock was solid iron. A normal man could not have broken it. And Wolfhart is not a normal man, is he? No, sir. He is a shifter, dangerous, unpredictable. Harrison stood for cross-examination. Deputy Garrett, you stated Kane Wolfhart is dangerous and unpredictable. Yet in his 32 years of life, how many violent crimes has he committed? Well, the answer is 0. He has never assaulted anyone, never killed anyone, never threatened anyone until the day you arrested him on false charges. Isn't that correct? Garrett's jaw tightened. The charges were legitimate. Were they? Because Magnus Corvain was just convicted of paying you $500 to plant evidence on Wolfhart's property. That makes you an accomplice to conspiracy and fraud, does it not? That has nothing to do with. Answer the question. Did you accept payment to frame Kane Wolfhart? The courtroom went dead silent. Garrett's face went red. On advice of my attorney, I invoke my right against self-incrimination. Murmurs swept the room. Harrison smiled coldly. No further questions. The prosecution rested. Now it was the defense's turn. Harrison called Serafina first. She walked to the stand slowly, one hand supporting her back, the other on her stomach. The baby kicked, as if sensing the importance of this moment. After she was sworn in, Harrison approached gently. Mrs. Wolfhart, please tell the court what happened on the evening of April 2nd. Serafina took a breath. I had gone to Magnus Corvain's office to gather evidence proving my husband's innocence. I found documents showing Magnus had orchestrated everything. The planted timber, the bribes, all of it. And what happened when Magnus discovered you? He confronted me, threatened me. I tried to leave, but he grabbed me. Her voice shook slightly. I heard shouting in the hallway, Magnus's men. They were saying I needed to disappear, that I was a problem that needed solving. I realized they were going to kill me. What did you do? I jumped out a window. I was 4 months pregnant, and I jumped because I knew if I stayed, I would die, and so would my child. The jury members, all men, shifted uncomfortably. Several looked at her stomach with visible distress. And did Kane know you were in danger? Yes, the clan was watching Magnus's building. When I went inside, they sent word to Kane. He heard Magnus's men planning my murder. So he escaped to save you? Yes. Davis stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Wolfhart, you claim my husband escaped to save you, but is it not true that he could have simply alerted the authorities? There was no time. The guards were all at the fire. By the time anyone responded, I would have been dead. Or perhaps your husband simply wanted freedom and used your predicament as an excuse. Harrison objected. Speculation. Sustain. But Davis pressed on. Is it not true, Mrs. Wolfhart, that you deliberately created this situation to justify your husband's escape? That you orchestrated this entire... I did not orchestrate nearly dying. Serafina's voice cracked. I did not orchestrate nearly losing my child. I jumped out of a window and bled for hours because I was trying to save my family. My husband broke out of an unjust imprisonment to save my life. If that is a crime, then every man on that jury should pray they are never faced with the same choice. The courtroom erupted in applause. Morgan gavelled for order, but did not look displeased. Davis had no further questions. Harrison called one more witness, Kane himself. The alpha stood, chains rattling. He walked to the stand with as much dignity as a shackled man could manage. When he sat, the chair creaked under his weight. Mr. Wolfhart, Harrison said, tell the court what you heard the night you escaped. Kane's voice was rough from weeks of silver poisoning. I heard Magnus's men. They were in the building next to the jail. Thin walls, They said Serafina was inside Magnus's office, that she had found evidence that she needed to disappear before she could testify. What did you do? I called to my clan. They created a distraction. When the guards left, I broke the lock and ran. Did you know escaping was illegal? Yes. Did you care? Kane looked directly at the jury. My wife was about to be murdered. My unborn child with her. No law in this world could have kept me from trying to save them. Harrison let the words hang. No further questions. Davis stood for cross. Mr. Wolfhart, you are asking this jury to believe you acted out of love and desperation. But is it not true that you barely knew your wife when you married her? That the marriage was one of convenience to legitimize an unexpected pregnancy? Kane's jaw tightened. Our marriage started as duty, but it became something more. How convenient. This transformation happened right when you needed a sympathetic story for the jury. It happened, Kane said quietly, because Serafina saw me. Not the giant, not the half-breed, Mishwam, and I saw her. A woman who had spent 15 years alone pouring her life into helping others, asking nothing in return. I fell in love with her courage, her intelligence, her fierce protection of those she cares for. He turned to look at Serafina. I love my wife, I love our child, and I would break out of 1,000 jails to keep them safe. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Davis had no response, no clever retort. He sat down. Harrison gave his closing argument. Kane Wolfhart is not a criminal. He is a husband and father who acted to save his family when the law could not protect them. Yes, he broke out of jail, but that jail was unjust. The arrest was fraudulent, the evidence planted, and his wife was about to be murdered by the same man who framed him. Any one of you would have done the same. Davis countered weakly. The law is the law. We cannot pick and choose which laws to follow based on circumstance. If we acquit Mr. Wolfhart, we send a message that anyone can break out of custody if they claim good intentions. The jury retired. This time the wait was longer, 90 minutes. When they returned, Serafina could not breathe. The foreman stood. We find the defendant, Kane Wolfhart, not guilty. The courtroom exploded again. But this time it was different. Relief, joy. People were crying. Judge Morgan addressed Kane. Mr. Wolfhart, this court recognizes that you acted under extraordinary duress to protect your family. However, let me be clear. Vigilante justice is not justice. You are fortunate that the circumstances were so clear-cut. Do not test the law's patience again. Yes, Your Honor, Kane said quietly. Bailiff, remove the shackles. The silver restraints fell away. Kane's skin underneath was raw, blistered, but already beginning to heal. He stood free for the first time in 3 weeks. His eyes found Serafina. She was already moving toward him as fast as her pregnant body allowed. They met in the middle of the courtroom. Kane lifted her gently, mindful of the baby, and buried his face in her hair. It is over, he whispered. We won. We did, Serafina said. We did. But even as she spoke, she saw movement in her peripheral vision. Magnus, being led out in chains by federal marshals. He was supposed to go straight to the prison wagon, supposed to be secured and transported. But something was wrong. One of the marshals stumbled. Magnus's elbow had caught him in the throat. The other marshal reached for his gun, but Magnus was faster spinning, grabbing the weapon. Someone screamed. Kane pushed Serafina behind him as Magnus raised the pistol. It was small, easily concealed. A derringer probably hidden in his boot. You took everything from me, Magnus snarled. My company, my reputation, my future. The courtroom was in chaos, people diving for cover, marshals drawing weapons. But I will take something from you first. The gun swung toward Serafina, toward her stomach. Kane moved, 8 feet of muscle and bone throwing itself between the bullet and his family. He moved faster than any human could, faster than thought. The gun fired. The bullet hit Kane in the chest, 2 inches left of center, silver. Of course Magnus would carry silver bullets. For one frozen second, everyone stopped. Kane looked down at the growing red stain on his shirt, touched it with his fingers. They came away bloody. Then he collapsed. Serafina screamed. She was on the floor beside him before anyone could stop her hands pressing against the wound. No, 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 no. Kane, stay with me. Stay with me. His eyes were glazing. The silver bullet was lodged near his heart, pumping poison through his system with every beat. Serafina, he managed. Blood bubbled at his lips. Our daughter, tell her. You will tell her yourself. Her hands were slick with blood. Too much blood. Someone get a doctor. But Elowin was already there, medical bag in hand. She looked at the wound and her face went white. The bullet is too close to his heart. If I try to extract it here without proper instruments, he will bleed out in seconds. Then what do? We get him to the clinic, now. Men lifted Kane carefully, carried him toward the door. His breathing was shallow, ragged, each breath weaker than the last. Silver poisoning was spreading. Serafina could see the veins around the wound turning black. Corruption racing through his system. He had minutes, maybe less. They made it to the clinic in 5 minutes that felt like hours. Laid Kane on the surgical table. Elowin began gathering instruments with practiced speed. I need to operate, extract the bullet. But Serafina, even if I get it out, the silver has been in his system too long. His heart. I can do it, Serafina said. What? I have studied shifter physiology for 15 years. I know their anatomy better than anyone in this territory. Her hands were steady despite the terror coursing through her. And I know something you do not. She placed one hand on her stomach. Shifter babies. Their blood is pure, untainted. It can neutralize silver poisoning in adults. Elowin's eyes widen. You want to draw blood from your unborn child. I want to save my husband. The risk. I know the risk. I accept it. Serafina looked at Kane's ashen face. We do this together, or we die together. Those are the only two options. Elowin stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Tell me what you need. Serafina moved into doctor mode, emotions locked away. Only the work mattered now. Scalpel, forceps, needle and surgical thread, and a syringe, 5 milliliter capacity. While Elowin gathered supplies, Serafina exposed her stomach. Used the syringe to draw amniotic fluid. Inside that fluid would be traces of the baby's blood. Not much, but hopefully enough. The needle puncture hurt, not as much as watching Kane die. She drew the fluid carefully, precisely. Then she turned to her husband. Hold him steady. Rowena and Tobias gripped Kane's shoulders. He was barely conscious now. Skin cold, lips blue. Serafina cut open his chest with hands that did not shake. Blood welled up. She ignored it. Found the bullet lodged between ribs, pressing against the pericardium. Forceps. Elowin placed them in her hand. Serafina worked the instrument around the bullet. One slip would puncture Kane's heart, would kill him instantly. She did not slip. The bullet came free with a wet sucking sound, silver as expected. Coated in blood turned black by poison. Now, she took the syringe of amniotic fluid and injected it directly into Kane's chest cavity, around his heart, into the corrupted tissue. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then Kane convulsed, his back arched. Gold eyes flew open, walled and unseeing. The black veins around the wound began to recede, slowly, then faster, the silver corruption being pushed back by the pure blood of his daughter. Kane gasped, a real breath, then another. Color returned to his skin. His heartbeat, which had been thready and weak, strengthened. Serafina stitched the wound with shaking hands. When she tied off the last suture, she finally let herself feel it. Relief, terror, love so fierce it burned. You are not allowed to die, she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. Do you hear me, Kane Wolfhart? I forbid it. His hand rose weakly, touched her face. Yes, ma'am, he breathed. Then he passed out. Not from poison, from exhaustion. From his body marshaling every resource to heal. But he was alive. They were both alive. Their daughter had saved her father before she was even born. Serafina slumped against the table, one hand on Kane's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The other hand on her stomach, where the baby kicked strongly. Thank you, she whispered to her unborn child. Thank you. 4.5 months later, on a warm August night, Luna Wolfhart came into the world screaming. The labor was long, but not complicated. Serafina's body, strengthened by months of hard living in the mountains, did what it was meant to do. Elowin attended, calm and competent. Kane held Serafina's hand through every contraction. 16 hours of labor. He never left her side. When the baby finally emerged slick and red and furious at being born, Cain cut the cord with hands that trembled. Elowen cleaned the infant quickly, wrapped her in soft blankets, placed her in Seraphina's arms. A girl, the midwife said, though they had all known, had all felt it somehow. Seraphina looked down at her daughter and felt her heart crack open. The baby's eyes opened. One was gold, pure shifter gold like Cain's. The other was blue, human blue like Seraphina's. Heterochromia, born of two worlds. Luna, Seraphina whispered. Her name is Luna. Cain leaned over them both, his massive frame creating a shelter, a protection. Tears streamed down his face. She is perfect. Then Luna did something impossible. She shifted. One moment a human infant, the next a tiny wolf cub, black-furred and gold-eyed. The shift lasted only seconds before she changed back exhausted by the effort. But it had happened. Shifters did not manifest until puberty. Everyone knew that. It was biological fact. Except Luna had just proven otherwise. She is special, Elowen breathed. I have delivered 100 shifter babies. None of them could shift at birth. Cain's expression was awed. She is her mother's daughter, doing impossible things before anyone tells her she cannot. 18 months later, the lodge on the mountain had changed. An addition had been built. A nursery where Luna slept when she slept. A toddler now walking and talking and shifting at will between girl and wolf cub. The clan had grown stronger. With Magnus's lands returned, families were rebuilding. The railroad had been rerouted around sacred lands after federal intervention. The coal deposits remained untouched, held in trust for future generations. Cain had been formally recognized by the clan council as alpha in full standing. No more whispers about half-breed blood. He had proven himself, had fought for his people, had built something worth protecting, and Seraphina had been recognized as Alpha's mate with all the rights and protections that entailed. The Hartford lawyers had dropped their claim after seeing Seraphina perform surgery on her husband while heavily pregnant. Even they recognized when they were outmatched. Now, on a bright October afternoon, the family sat on the ridge behind the lodge. Luna played at their feet, shifting between forms with the ease of breathing. One moment a toddler with her mother's features and her father's coloring. The next a wolf cub tumbling through fallen leaves. Seraphina sat with Cain's arm around her, one hand on her stomach, where a second child grew. A boy this time. They had decided to name him after no one. He would forge his own path. Do you ever regret it? Seraphina asked quietly. That night in the blizzard? Everything that came after. Cain was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I regret every day before it. Every year I spent alone, convinced I did not deserve love or family or happiness. I regret not meeting you sooner. He pulled her closer. But regret what we have built, never. Luna bounded over, shifting mid-leap to land in her father's lap as a girl. Papa, tell story. What story, little wolf? How you saved Mama. Cain looked at Seraphina. She smiled. Your mama saved me, Cain said, lifting Luna. I was locked away. She was the one who fought, who risked everything, who proved that courage lives in the smallest frames and the fiercest hearts. And Papa saved Mama from bad man, Luna insisted. Yes, I took a bullet for your mama. But do you know what really saved me? Luna shook her head, gold and blue eyes wide. You did. Your blood, your strength. You saved both your parents before you were even born. He kissed her forehead. You are a miracle, Luna Wolfheart. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. The toddler squirmed free, shifting to wolf form, and raced off to chase a butterfly. Seraphina leaned against Cain's shoulder. She is going to be extraordinary. She already is. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play. Below in the valley, smoke rose from 100 chimneys in Pine Haven. The town had grown, prospered. Shifter and human families lived side by side now, building something better together. Seraphina thought about the journey, the blizzard that had brought her to Cain, the pregnancy that had bound them, the conspiracy that had tested them, the bullet that had nearly destroyed them, and the love that had saved them all. What are you thinking? Cain asked. That they said you were too much, too big, too different, too damaged to love. They said I was too old, too set in my ways, too broken to start over. They were wrong. They were, but we had to prove it, had to fight for it. She looked up at him, and I would do it all again, every terrifying moment, because it led to this. Kane's hand covered hers on her stomach, felt the flutter of their son, watched Luna tumble through the grass in wolf form, happy and free and unafraid. They called me cursed, he said quietly, the half-breed who would never belong, who would die alone in these mountains. And I found you, found our family, found a pack that accepts me, a purpose beyond survival. His gold eyes met her blue ones. They were wrong about the curse. He gestured to Luna, to Serafina's pregnant belly. To the valley below. This is the blessing. Serafina kissed him, soft and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, Luna had shifted back to human form and was dragging over a piece of wood. Papa, carve! Kane pulled out his knife, began shaping the wood with those massive hands that could break stone but chose to create beauty. Serafina watched him work, watched Luna watch her father with adoring eyes, felt the baby kick inside her. This was what they had fought for, what they had nearly died for. Not land, not coal, not revenge. Family. The sun set over the Bighorn Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the valley, a wolf howled, Kane's clan calling to their alpha. He howled back. Luna joined in, her child's voice blending with her father's deep tones. Serafina did not howl, but she added her voice anyway, human words carrying on the mountain wind. We survived. We fought. We won. And in the lodge behind them, the wooden animals Kane had carved over the years stood silent witness. Bear and deer and wolf, each one a prayer for gentleness, for creation over destruction, for love to conquer everything that tried to destroy it. Luna would grow up knowing her father's hands built beautiful things, would grow up knowing her mother fought armies to protect their family, would grow up in a world where half-breeds were not shameful, where 43 was not too old for miracles, where love bent to no prejudice and bowed to no fear. The Wolfhart family had proven something the territory needed to learn, that courage recognizes no bloodline, that justice sometimes wears a scholar's face, that the biggest hearts beat in the chest of those the world tried to make small, and that sometimes the greatest legacies are built not by those who had everything, but by those who refused to accept having nothing. Kane finished the carving, a small wooden figure of a mother wolf with her cub. He placed it in Luna's hands. For you, little one, so you remember where you came from. Luna clutched it tight. Love you, Papa. I love you too, more than the mountains, more than the stars. Serafina stood, pulled them both close. Her family, hard-won and fiercely protected. They walked back to the lodge as darkness fell, Luna between them, holding both their hands. And somewhere in the night, the mountain itself seemed to sigh with satisfaction. The wolf had found his mate. The scholar had found her purpose. The child had found her strength. And the reckoning, that terrible, beautiful reckoning that had nearly destroyed them, had forged them into something unbreakable. Family. Pack. Forever.